He owned this city. He controlled the ports, the politicians, the judges, and the men who made problems disappear before sunrise. Vincent DeLuca had never once in 30 years lost anything he decided to keep. But tonight, he walked through the front door of his $15 million Greenwich estate and found nothing but silence, a gold wedding band sitting on the dining table, and a handwritten note with 4 words that hit harder than any bullet ever had. Don't look for us. The most feared man in America had just lost the only thing that was never supposed to leave. The evening had started the way Vincent DeLuca preferred all his evenings. Controlled, curated, and entirely on his terms. The Empire Crown sat 62 floors above Midtown Manhattan, a rooftop restaurant so exclusive that a reservation required either a 7-figure annual membership or a phone call from someone whose name you already feared. The maitre d' never checked Vincent's name against a list. He simply stepped aside, eyes down, the way everyone stepped aside when Vincent walked into a room. It wasn't the tailored black suit, though the suit was immaculate, cut by a Roman tailor who flew to New York twice a year specifically for Vincent's fittings. It wasn't the 2 men who materialized at the elevator bank without ever appearing to follow him. It was something older than money and quieter than a weapon. It was the specific gravity of a man who had never once in his adult life been told no and believed it. Vanessa Sterling was already seated when he arrived. Of course she was. People arrived early for Vincent. She was 31 years old, the kind of beautiful that photographed poorly because cameras couldn't capture the way she moved. And she laughed at his second remark the way women laughed when they were genuinely amused rather than performing amusement for an audience. She touched his hand twice during the appetizer course. The second time, her fingers lingered. Vincent noticed the waiter. Not right away. His attention had been distributed across the room the way it always was, a habit so deeply embedded after 3 decades in the organization that he no longer experienced it as vigilance, but simply as perception. He registered exits, registered faces, registered the particular quality of stillness in people who were pretending not to watch. The waiter was a young man, early 20s, dark hair, moving through the room with the practiced invisibility of someone who understood his role. He was good. Vincent had employed men who were good at invisibility, and he recognized the technique. The waiter moved too efficiently, paused too briefly near their table, and when he refilled the water glasses, his right arm angled slightly inward in the way a right arm angled when the left hand was doing something below the table line. Vincent didn't react. He lifted his wine glass and said something that made Vanessa laugh again, and beneath the table, his right hand had already closed around his phone to send a single text to the man stationed near the elevator. Waiter. Dark hair. Table 7 corridor. And then he set the phone down and smiled at Vanessa Sterling and let the evening continue because Vincent DeLuca had learned long before he was 30 that the worst thing you could do when you spotted a threat was let the threat know you'd spotted it. Later, much later, when he was reconstructing the sequence of events in the particular quiet of a ruined life, he would recognize that the photograph had already been taken by then, that everything which followed had been set in motion before the wine was finished. But on that rooftop, with the city spread 62 floors beneath him and Vanessa's laughter warming the space between them, Vincent DeLuca felt like a man who controlled the variables. He felt, in the specific way that always preceded catastrophe for people like him, like nothing could touch him. He was home before midnight. The drive from Manhattan to Greenwich took 40 minutes on empty roads. Marcus, who had driven Vincent for 11 years and knew better than to make conversation, kept the partition up. Vincent sat in the back of the black Suburban with his jacket unbuttoned and his phone in his hand, scrolling through numbers he would need to call tomorrow. The photographer's situation would be managed by morning. The organization had people whose entire professional function was making moments like that disappear, and Vincent had long since stopped feeling anything particular about deploying them. Problems appeared. Problems were addressed. That was the rhythm of his life, and it had worked without interruption for 30 years. The estate came into view through the trees at 11:47. From the road, it looked exactly as it always looked. Lit windows on the ground floor, the security lamp over the garage, the stone path leading to the front entrance where Claire always left the porch light on. She had started doing that years ago, when Ethan was born, because she said she wanted Vincent to be able to see his way home on the nights he came back late. He had never told her how that detail affected him. He was not built for telling people how details affected him. But he noticed. He had always noticed. Marcus pulled through the gate. The gravel crunched under the tires the way it always did. Vincent was out of the car before it fully stopped, jacket over his arm, already thinking about whether Ethan was asleep or whether the boy would be staged at the top of the stairs the way he sometimes was. Pretending he'd woken up by accident, knowing his father would carry him back to bed, knowing Vincent would sit on the edge of the mattress for a few minutes in the dark. Those were the minutes Vincent never spoke about to anyone. They were the minutes that existed outside the organization, outside the ledgers and the negotiations and the particular moral weight of the work, and he protected them the way he protected very few things. The front door was unlocked. He registered that. Claire was careful about the locks, had been since before Ethan was born, one of the quiet anxieties she carried without ever making into a discussion. An unlocked door at midnight was unusual. He filed it without dwelling on it, pushed inside, reached for the hall switch. The house was still. Not quiet the way a sleeping house was quiet, with the particular compressed atmosphere of bodies at rest and the small sounds of climate systems and old wood. This was a different quality of stillness. This was the stillness of a space that had been emptied. Vincent stood in the hallway for 3 seconds before he understood that distinction, and those 3 seconds were the last 3 seconds of the life he had been living. He walked through to the kitchen first. The dinner things had been washed and put away. There was no food on the stove, no note on the refrigerator, no indication that anyone had been here in hours or had planned to be here later. He walked back through the hall, past the staircase, toward the dining room, and that was when he saw the ring. It sat in the center of the dining table, catching the light from the chandelier. Claire's wedding band, the one she had worn for 9 years without removing it even once that he could remember. Beside it, folded once, a piece of notepaper in Claire's handwriting. The letters were very clear. She had not been shaking when she wrote it. Don't look for us. Vincent DeLuca stood in the center of his $15 million dining room, in the house he had bought and furnished and staffed and secured, and something happened in his chest that he had no adequate vocabulary for. He was not a man who used words like devastated or shattered. Those were words from a register he had systematically excised from his emotional vocabulary somewhere around the age of 19, because they were words that implied a kind of open wound. And open wounds in his world were simply places where enemies put knives. But standing there in the silence with Claire's ring on the table and the note in his hand, Vincent DeLuca felt something crack open that he had not known was capable of cracking. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Ethan's room was at the end of the hall, decorated in the navy and white nautical theme Claire had chosen the year before Ethan started school. The bed was made, not in the way a child made a bed, hurried, corners untucked, pillow crooked. It was made the way Claire made a bed, smooth and deliberate. The way you made a bed when you were not planning to sleep in it again anytime soon. The stuffed penguin Ethan called Captain was gone from its place against the pillow. The small backpack that lived on the hook beside the closet was gone. The framed photograph on the nightstand, Ethan at 5 years old, sitting on Vincent's shoulders at the edge of the Hudson, both of them laughing at something that no longer existed in any recordable form, was still there. Claire had left that one. Vincent didn't know what to do with that fact, so he simply stood holding it until his hands remembered that they were capable of putting things down. Their bedroom was the same story. Claire's side of the closet had been cleared with the efficient selectiveness of someone who had thought about it in advance. Not everything was gone. She had left behind the fur coats, the couture gowns, the things that had been bought for the life rather than for her. But the practical things were missing. Jeans, sweaters, the soft, worn things she wore on ordinary days. The overnight bag she kept on the closet shelf. The small leather case where she stored the jewelry she'd owned before Vincent. The pieces her mother had left her. The things that actually mattered to her as opposed to the things that had been given to signal what she was worth to him. All of it gone. On Vincent's nightstand, where Claire sometimes left small notes when she was awake before him and didn't want to disturb his sleep, there was nothing. Just the lamp, the glass of water, the book she had been reading face down with the spine cracked the way that always made him want to say something about the binding. The book was still there. She had left the book. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He sat there for a long time. Then he called Marcus. By 2 a.m, the house was full of men. Not the domestic staff. Vincent had sent them home months ago when Claire mentioned she found the constant presence suffocating. one of the small concessions he had made without marking it as a concession. These were his men. Sal Benedetto, who had been with Vincent since the early days in South Brooklyn, stood in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and the particular careful blankness of someone who understood that the correct response to his boss's pain was to look like he wasn't witnessing it. Tommy Reardon, younger, sharper, Vincent's primary intelligence contact for the past 4 years, was already on his phone in the corner of the living room, speaking quietly to someone who would begin pulling surveillance records within the hour. 2 other men stood in the foyer, waiting for instruction. "Credit cards," Vincent said. He was standing at the dining room table with his sleeves rolled up, the wedding ring sitting beside his right hand where he had placed it after he retrieved it from the center of the table. He had not put it away. He did not know why. "Check every card she has access to, any transaction in the past 48 hours. "Already running it," Tommy said without looking up. "Airport footage. Penn Station, Grand Central, Port Authority. She had at least a few hours on me. She could have gotten a train to anywhere on the Northeast Corridor." He thought for a moment. "She won't fly. She doesn't like flying alone with Ethan. Ground transportation." "We've got contacts at all 3, Sal said. "I'll have someone at each terminal before 4. Rental cars. If she drove, she didn't use her own. That plate is too easy to run. She would have had someone arrange something she couldn't be connected to." Vincent stopped. He was thinking about Claire arranging something she couldn't be connected to. Claire, who had spent 9 years in a world where men arranged things they couldn't be connected to. And despite everything, she had absorbed more than he had ever credited her for. He felt something move through him that was not quite pride and not quite fear, and was possibly both at once. She had help. Find out who. Her friend from the city, one of the men in the foyer offered. The one she used to work with. Diane. "Calloway," Vincent said. Diane Calloway. They went to school together. He had met Diane 3 times over the course of 9 years. A small, precise woman who had never warmed to Vincent and had never pretended to, which was more honesty than most people in his world managed. "Don't approach her. Don't let her know we're looking. If she's helping Claire and she sees us coming, she'll warn her and Claire will move again." Sal nodded. "Hotels. Start with the obvious. Mid-price chains, places that don't ask too many questions, and take cash at check-in." She took money. Vincent had checked. The household safe in his study, which contained $50,000 in emergency cash that he kept accessible for exactly the kind of situations his work occasionally generated, had been opened, not cleaned out. Claire had taken $20,000 and left the rest, which told him something about the nature of her exit. She had taken what she needed. She had not wanted everything. $20,000 gets her 2 months minimum if she's careful, and she's always been careful. He looked down at the ring on the table. "She's been planning this," he said. Not as an accusation, as a recognition. No one answered because no one in that room was going to tell Vincent DeLuca what he already knew. The photograph arrived at 7:43 in the morning. It appeared on 3 separate devices simultaneously: Vincent's personal phone, his business phone, and the secure tablet Tommy used for sensitive communications, which meant whoever had distributed it wasn't an amateur and wasn't operating from a single-point position. The image was clear, high resolution, shot from inside the Empire Crown, angle consistent with a position near the service corridor, which was exactly where the dark-haired waiter had been stationed when Vincent first registered the anomaly. In the photograph, Vincent was leaning slightly forward across the table toward Vanessa Sterling. Vanessa's hand was on his. They were both smiling. It was the kind of image that required no caption. Vincent looked at it for exactly 4 seconds. Then he called the number for his image management team and gave them the distribution list. Then he set down the phone and thought about Claire seeing this photograph. He thought about Claire seeing it alone, without warning, without the version of events that he would have constructed if he'd had the chance, without anything except the image itself and the 9 years of their marriage sitting behind it like a wound that had never quite closed. He thought about Claire looking at that photograph and then looking at their son's face and making the decision she had made, and he understood, with a clarity that was new and extremely uncomfortable, that there was no version of events he could have constructed that would have changed what she saw in that image. He had not been misrepresented in the photograph. He had simply been seen. The The next 72 hours were the most methodical and the most desperate of Vincent DeLuca's life, which was a combination he had no framework for managing. Methodical, he understood. He had built an organization on the architecture of methodical response, on the principle that emotion was a luxury and that problems were solved through information and leverage and the patient application of resources. He applied all of those things now. He had people at every transit hub in the tri-state area. He had a former NSA contractor pulling cell tower data in a 20-mile radius around Greenwich, trying to reconstruct Claire's movement pattern in the hours before Vincent came home. He had private investigators in 6 cities running down mutual acquaintances, former colleagues, anyone Claire had maintained a relationship with in the years since their marriage had quietly reorganized her entire social world around his. He spent money with a carelessness that would have alarmed him in any other context. The number had stopped mattering the moment he read the note. Desperate, he had no framework for it all. He had not slept. He recognized this as a tactical problem. A sleep-deprived commander made errors, and this was the most important operation he had ever run. But every time he lay down in the bedroom that still smelled faintly of Claire's shampoo, something in his chest seized in a way that made sleep feel like an abandonment. He ate mechanically when Sal put food in front of him, drank coffee in quantities that made his hands slightly unsteady, and sat in the chair in his study for hours between phone calls, turning the wedding ring over in his fingers without realizing he was doing it until he looked down and found it there. The false sightings began on the second day. A woman matching Claire's description had checked into a motel in Stamford. Vincent had 3 men there inside 20 minutes. It was not Claire. A woman with a young boy had boarded a train in Philadelphia. Not Claire. A credit card registered to a college roommate of Claire's had been used at a gas station in rural New Jersey. Not Claire. The card had been stolen by someone entirely unrelated to anyone in Vincent's world, a coincidence so mundane it felt almost like mockery. Each false lead did something to him that he could not fully account for. The relief when a sighting was reported, and then the specific quality of the collapse when it turned out to be wrong. This cycle was doing something to his internal architecture that he had no precedent for. He was not built for sustained hope. He had learned, at an age when most people were still learning to drive, that hope was a liability and that the correct emotional posture toward desired outcomes was detachment. Want the result? Work toward the result. Do not allow yourself to feel the wanting. He had maintained that posture for 30 years in a world that would have destroyed a man who felt too much. He could not maintain it now. On the 3rd night, alone in the study, after Sal and Tommy had finally gone home to sleep, Vincent opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out the photograph he kept there. Not the photograph from the rooftop restaurant. That image was burned into a region of his brain he would have preferred to excise. This was a different photograph. It was from their 3rd year of marriage, taken at a beach house in the Outer Banks that they had rented for a week, because Claire had said she wanted somewhere that didn't feel like Vincent's world, and he had agreed because he was still, at that point, capable of making small surrenders without understanding what they cost him in the long run. In the photograph, Claire was standing at the waterline with Ethan. Ethan had been 2, barely walking, unsteady in the sand, and she was holding his hands as he jumped over the smallest possible waves. Her head was thrown back. She was laughing. Not the careful social laughter of the events and dinners that constituted Vincent's professional world, but the kind of laughter that arrived without permission, that you couldn't manage or direct. Ethan was laughing too, that helpless full-body convulsion of a 2-year-old who has discovered something delightful for the first time. Vincent was behind the camera. He had not been in the water that day. He had sat on the porch and watched and taken photographs because he was constitutionally incapable of simply being inside the moment without also monitoring it from outside. And he had understood even at the time that this was a failure of some kind that he was not equipped to correct. But he had taken the photograph, and he had kept it, and he had looked at it more times than he would ever tell anyone. He set it on the desk in front of him. He thought about Ethan. He thought about Ethan at 6 years old, who had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn jaw, and who asked, without any apparent self-consciousness, approximately 400 questions per day about how things worked and why things were the way they were. Who had recently developed an intense interest in volcanoes and would explain tectonic plate theory to anyone who sat still long enough. Who fell asleep every night with Captain the Stuffed Penguin under his left arm, and who sometimes woke from bad dreams and wanted, specifically, his father. Who called out not for his mother in those moments, but for Vincent, and who, when Vincent came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, would grip his father's hand with both of his small ones and fall back to sleep in less than 5 minutes. The thought of Ethan in a strange bed without Captain. No, Ethan had taken Captain. Claire had made sure of that. The thought of Ethan in a strange bed in a place Vincent didn't know, falling asleep without knowing where his father was, waking from a dream, and calling out into the dark of a room that held none of the familiar geography that made rooms safe. Vincent set the photograph face down on the desk. He pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed. The call he had been dreading came on the 4th morning. It came from Tommy, not from any of the investigators, which told Vincent something about the nature of what was coming before a word was spoken. Tommy had a voice he used for information delivery and a different voice he used for situations where the information was going to require management after it was delivered. This was the second voice. "We found a transaction," Tommy said. "Debit card. Registered to a name I'm going to guess you don't know. Maya Perez, small business account." "I don't know that name." "No reason you would. It's a DBA, doing business as, filed with the state of Connecticut about 16 months ago. Small investment consulting firm, one-person operation." A pause. "The primary on the account, when we ran it back, is Claire." Vincent was quiet for 3 seconds. "She had a company," he said. "Appears so. She started it 16 months ago, and I didn't know." Tommy said nothing because there was nothing to say. "What's the transaction?" "Office supplies, commercial paper and printer cartridges. Shipped to a business address in Manhattan." Tommy gave him the address. "A building in the 50s, Midtown East, commercial leasing district." "She's got an office, Vincent. Has had one for at least a few months, looks like. The business address has been on the entity filing since last spring." Vincent sat with this information. Claire had been building something, quietly, without telling him, without giving him the opportunity to redirect or absorb or make it about the organization. She had filed a company, rented office space, and been operating a business for 16 months while sitting across from him at dinner and carrying Ethan to school and doing everything that constituted the visible surface of their life together. He thought about all the times she had mentioned going into the city, the lunches with Diane, the charity board meetings she sat on because it was expected of her, the occasional gallery opening she attended with other women from their social world. And he wondered how many of those times had been something else entirely. He wondered what else he hadn't known. The answer arrived with a weight he wasn't prepared for, because the truth was that he didn't know what else he hadn't known. He had been so certain that his intelligence apparatus, his understanding of his own household, his knowledge of Claire, the deep, confident knowledge of a man who had shared 9 years with a woman, he had been so certain that it was comprehensive. And 16 months of a parallel professional life had been happening inside that certainty without creating a single visible crack. "Get me everything on the company," he said. "Revenue, client list, any filings, any business relationships. And I want a physical on the office. I can have someone there in 2 hours. I'll go myself." Silence on the other end. Tommy had the good sense not to argue. "Okay. And Tommy," Vincent paused, "whatever she's built, I want to know how good it is." There was a specific quality to that request, and Tommy heard it clearly. "I'll find out." Time. He had 2 days before the information on the investment firm came back fully, and in those 2 days, Vincent did something he had not done in the previous decade. He canceled everything, not rescheduled, not delegated. He called his underboss, a composed and capable man named Arthur Malone, who had been running the day-to-day of the organization's legitimate front operations for 6 years, and told him to manage the upcoming week of meetings independently. He called the law firm that had been expecting him for a deposition preparation session and told them it would need to wait. He called 3 separate contacts in the financial sector who had been awaiting his signature on transactions that would move significant sums across several holding entities and told them the timeline was shifting. The silence on the other end of each of those calls said everything. These were men and women who understood that Vincent DeLuca did not cancel. In 30 years, he had postponed meetings perhaps a dozen times, always with immediate rescheduling, always with the message that the delay was a scheduling matter rather than a priority matter. This time he did not offer rescheduling. Sal cornered him in the kitchen on the afternoon of the 5th day. "Vincent," he said. He had known Vincent long enough to use the name without prefix in private moments, which was a privilege extended to perhaps 4 people in the world, and had been earned in the specific difficult currency of 3 decades of shared work. The Marchetti sit-down is in 4 days. You cannot reschedule the Marchetti sit-down. The Marchetti sit-down was a negotiation that had been 18 months in the making, a restructuring of territorial arrangements between Vincent's organization and a Philadelphia family that had been generating friction for several years. The kind of meeting where your absence was read not as a scheduling conflict, but as a statement of position, and not a position you wanted to have made for you. "I know," Vincent said. Then, "I know, Sal." Sal looked at him for a long moment. He had a face that had absorbed a great deal over 30 years and had learned to reveal very little, but something moved through it now. "She took the kid." "Yes." "And you don't know where?" "Not yet." "Vincent!" Sal pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, which was unusual. Sal stood during difficult conversations as a matter of habit, as if remaining on his feet preserved some option for a faster exit. Sitting meant he was staying. "I've watched you run this organization through things that would have broken other men. I've watched you make decisions that—" He stopped, started again. "I've never seen you like this. I've never been like this. What do you want to do?" Vincent thought about the question. It was on its surface a simple operational question. Sal was asking for instruction, for the direction that would allow the machinery to start moving again. But underneath it was a different question, the one Sal was too careful to ask directly, which was, "Who are you going to be about this?" Vincent looked down at his hands. "I want to find them," he said. "I want to find them, and I want to—" He stopped, corrected. "I need to know they're safe. Whatever else comes after that, I need to know they're safe." Sal nodded slowly. "And the rest of it? The organization? It'll wait." Another long look. "For how long?" "For as long as it takes." Sal sat with that for a moment. Then he pushed back from the table and stood, which meant the conversation was concluded. "Okay," he said simply, and he went to make more phone calls. The intelligence report on Maya Perez Consulting arrived on the morning of the 6th day, and Vincent read it twice before he fully absorbed what he was reading. The firm had been quietly functional for 16 months, operating initially at minimal revenue. 2 or 3 small clients, modest consultation fees, the kind of performance you'd expect from a one-person operation with limited startup capital. But approximately 8 months ago, something had shifted. A client relationship with a mid-sized technology company had led to a referral that had led to a series of portfolio consultations, and the quality of Claire's analysis, the reports were attached. Vincent read them, was striking. She had a framework for risk assessment that was rigorous and counterintuitive, the kind of thinking that announced itself as unusual within the first 2 pages. 2 of the clients who had engaged her had subsequently expanded those engagements significantly. In the last 4 months, the firm's revenue had increased by nearly 300%. She was good, not good in the way of someone who had married money and absorbed financial competence by proximity. Good in the way of someone who had a genuine mind for it, who thought about capital and risk with the particular unsentimental precision that the field rewarded. Vincent knew what sophisticated financial analysis looked like. He had deployed it in service of his own operation for 30 years, and what Claire had produced in those reports was not the work of an amateur. He set the report down. He thought about the woman he had married 9 years ago, who had been finishing a graduate degree in economics when they met and who had spoken, in the early years, with a specific restrained excitement about the work she wanted to do. Who had at some point that Vincent had not precisely tracked, stopped talking about it. Who had organized herself around his world so completely and so gracefully that he had stopped seeing the shape of what she had set aside to do it. He had known she was intelligent. He had known this the way you knew a fact, clearly, accurately, without it changing your behavior in any particular way. It had not occurred to him, in any meaningful sense, that she might be building something in parallel, that while he was operating his empire, she had been quietly constructing a foundation for the moment she would need to stand on something other than him. It had not occurred to him because he had not made room for the possibility. He picked up his phone. "Tommy!" His voice was level. Whatever was happening in his chest was not visible in his voice. That much discipline, at least, he still had access to. "The office address?" "I'm going today?" "I can have a team No team, just Marcus." A pause. She might not be there. I know she might not be there. And if she is? Vincent looked out the window at the manicured grounds of the estate. The stone garden path Claire had designed 3 years ago, the Japanese maple she had planted herself in a specific spot she'd chosen because of the way the afternoon light hit it. The tree was beginning to turn. It was autumn, and the leaves were going red. If she is, he said, then she is. I'm not going there to drag anyone home, Tommy. I just need to see. He said it like it was a simple thing. He said it like a man who still believed he was capable of just seeing. He was wrong about that. But he wouldn't know it until he got there, until the elevator doors opened on the 14th floor of a glass and steel midtown tower, and he walked into the corridor and heard, through the frosted glass door of suite 1407, the low, clear sound of his wife's voice, measured and confident, speaking to someone about risk-adjusted returns. Vincent stopped walking. He stood in the corridor with his hand 2 inches from the door handle and listened to Claire's voice, and something in that voice, the authority of it, the ease of it, the complete and total absence of the particular careful softness she had adopted in their home over the years, landed on him like a physical weight. He had not known she sounded like that. He had never heard her sound like that. He stood there for 40 seconds. Then he turned around, walked back to the elevator, and rode down 60 seconds of vertical silence before he called Tommy. "She's there," he said. "You want me to—" "No," Vincent said. "I want you to find out everything. I want to know every client, every contact, every investor. I want to know how solid it is." He thought for a moment. "And I want to know if she has protection. Anyone looking out for her and Ethan." A pause. "You think someone would come at them?" "No," Vincent said, "but I want to know." He got into the Suburban. Marcus pulled into traffic without asking where they were going because he could read the quality of the silence correctly and understood that the destination was not yet determined. They drove west through Midtown for several blocks before Vincent said anything else. "Ethan's birthday is in 6 weeks." Marcus said nothing. "He's turning 7, Vincent said. He said it to the window, to the city moving past it, to no one in particular. He told me he wanted a volcano cake. His mother was going to make it because he insisted it had to be homemade." A pause. He was very specific about the lava. The city slid past in its ordinary afternoon indifference. Taxis, pedestrians, construction scaffolding, the endless forward motion of a place that did not register the specific collapse occurring in the back of one of its 10,000 black SUVs. "I wasn't there enough," Vincent said quietly. Not to Marcus, not to anyone he needed to hear it, just to the fact of it. "I knew I wasn't, and I told myself it was the work, that the work was the thing that made all of it possible, and that the time I wasn't there was the cost of the time I was there, and that made it a transaction I could accept." He stopped. She never accepted that transaction. She just stopped arguing about it. He looked down at his hand. The ring was in his jacket pocket. He had put it there before he left the estate that morning, without having decided to do so, and he had not examined the decision because it was the kind of decision that didn't survive examination. "I need to go back," he said. "Tell me when we know where she's staying." Marcus said, "Yes, sir." And in a rented 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, in a neighborhood Claire had chosen because it had good schools and sidewalks wide enough for a 6-year-old to ride a scooter and a coffee shop on the corner where no one knew her last name. Claire Whitmore DeLuca put down her phone after ending a call with a new client and allowed herself, for the first time in 6 days, a full breath. Ethan was in the 2nd-bedroom building something complicated with the small set of blocks he'd insisted on packing, narrating the construction project to Captain in a low, serious voice. The apartment was small. Nothing in it cost more than $400. The sheets on the beds were from a department store 2 blocks away, bought the day they arrived, still smelling faintly of the factory. She had not slept well. She had not expected to sleep well. But she had slept, which was something. And this morning she had woken before Ethan and sat in the kitchen with a coffee and thought, clearly and without the static of panic, about what came next. What came next was the business. What came next was the client she'd just signed, and the 2 pending proposals, and the investor conversation she had scheduled for Thursday with a man she'd met at a conference 8 months ago who had been interested in her framework from the first email. What came next was the life she had been assembling in the margins of the life she'd been living, quietly and carefully, and without ever allowing herself to fully imagine inhabiting it, because imagining it had felt too much like deciding to leave, and she had not been ready to decide. The photograph had made the decision for her. She looked at Ethan's backpack hanging by the door, at Captain's beak just visible through the mesh pocket where Ethan had stored him for the walk to school that morning, at the handprint painting Ethan had made in his first week at the new school, hung with 2 pieces of tape on the refrigerator because she had not found a frame yet, but had wanted it up immediately. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. An unknown number, which she forwarded to voicemail without answering, which she had been doing all week because she knew exactly who was behind the unknown numbers, and she was not ready, and she might not be ready for a very long time. She picked up her laptop and opened the investor proposal she'd been drafting, and she worked. And outside the window, the city did what it always did, which was continue without interruption. But 3 miles south, in the back of a black Suburban stuck in midtown traffic, Vincent DeLuca had just learned something that was going to change the shape of everything that followed. He had learned that Claire had not run away. She had arrived somewhere. And the distance between those 2 things was the longest distance he had ever faced. The intelligence package on Claire's apartment arrived at 6:14 in the morning, delivered by Tommy in person rather than by phone, which told Vincent everything he needed to know about the sensitivity of what was inside before he opened it. He was already awake. He had been awake since 4, sitting in the study with the lamp on and the house around him doing its empty impression of a home. And when he heard Marcus let Tommy in through the side entrance, he didn't move from the chair. Tommy came in, set a manila envelope on the desk, and stood back with his hands in his jacket pockets. Upper West Side, Tommy said. West 83rd. The building's a pre-war 6-story, the kind that takes cash deposits and doesn't ask questions if the references check out. She's on the 4th floor, 2-bedroom unit. He paused. Ethan's enrolled in school 3 blocks away. Started Monday. Vincent looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. She's got a doorman, Tommy continued. Old guy. Been there 12 years. Name's Gerald. From what we can tell, she introduced herself as Claire Whitmore. Maiden name, no DeLuca. Paid 3 months up front. Cash. Who helped her? Diane Calloway. She's the one who found the apartment, got the references sorted, handled the initial contact with the building. She's been there twice since Claire moved in. Both times she brought groceries. Vincent nodded slowly. Diane Calloway, who had looked at him across 3 separate dinner tables with the composed unfriendliness of a woman who had already decided what she thought of him and saw no reason to revise. He felt something toward Diane Calloway now that was not quite gratitude and not quite its opposite. She had helped Claire disappear, which made her a problem in the operational sense, but she had also made sure Claire and Ethan had groceries in a strange apartment in the first week, which was the kind of detail that mattered to him in a way he couldn't explain and wouldn't try. Don't touch Calloway, he said. I wasn't planning. I mean it, Tommy. Nobody goes near her. Nobody watches her building. Nobody pulls her phone records. Nobody does anything that could make its way back to Claire. He finally reached for the envelope and opened it. Surveillance photographs. The building exterior, the school entrance 2 blocks north, the coffee shop on the corner that appeared in 2 of the shots with Claire visible through the window, sitting alone with a laptop. In one photograph, taken from across the street with a long lens, Ethan was walking out of the school building with a backpack too large for his frame, holding a piece of paper that might have been a drawing, looking up at something off camera with his mouth open in what was clearly a question. 6 years old, asking a question. Of course he was. Vincent set that photograph face down on the desk. She knows we're looking, he said. Almost certainly. Is she scared? Tommy thought about it. The woman I've been hearing about from the building staff and the school administration? No, she's not scared. He chose his next words carefully. She seems settled, like she made a decision and she's living inside it. Vincent absorbed that. Settled. He turned the word over. Claire, who had spent 9 years navigating the social architecture of his world with a grace that he had relied on without ever adequately acknowledging, was settled in a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side with cash furniture and department store sheets. And the word for her was settled. Get out, he said. Not harshly, just finally. Tommy got out. Sal arrived at 8 with 2 coffees and the specific expression of a man who had decided to say something difficult and had been building toward it since before he left his house. He sat down across from Vincent in the kitchen and put one of the coffees in front of him and wrapped both hands around his own cup and said, "The Marchetti sit-down is in 2 days." "I know." "Vincent," Sal set down his coffee, "you've been running this organization for 18 years. In 18 years, you have never let personal business bleed into organizational business. That's not nothing. That's the reason we're all still here and not in a cell or a hole in the ground somewhere." "I know that too." "Then you know that if you don't show up to that meeting, Sal, I'll show up," Vincent said. Sal stopped, recalibrated. "Okay, I'll show up to the meeting, I'll handle Marchetti, and then I'm going back to figuring this out." He picked up the coffee. "But I want something understood, Sal. This organization, the whole apparatus, it does not go near Claire, it does not go near Ethan. Nobody follows her, nobody pressures her, nobody sends a message. Nobody makes a phone call designed to make her feel like she needs to come back. Are we clear?" Sal looked at him for a long moment. "We're clear, because if I find out anyone in this organization made Claire's life harder than I already have, I will handle it personally, and I will not be measured about it." The word measured landed in the kitchen with the specific weight of a man who had spent 30 years being measured about things that required unmeasured responses. And both men understood exactly what sat beneath it. Sal picked up his coffee. "Clear," he said again. The Marchetti meeting took place in the private dining room of a restaurant in South Philadelphia that had served as neutral territory for interorganizational negotiations for 20 years. Neutral in the technical sense, not owned by either party, not staffed by anyone with a known allegiance, monitored by agreement rather than by force. Frank Marchetti was 63 years old, broad through the shoulders, with the particular patience of a man who had survived long enough in a particular world to understand that patience was itself a weapon. He had brought 2 advisors and left his security in the hallway, which was the agreed format. Vincent had done the same. They shook hands, they sat. Coffee was brought. "You look tired," Marchetti said, not unkindly, as an observation. "Long week," Vincent said. "I heard something about your family's situation." Marchetti's voice was careful, sympathetic in the way of men who understood that sympathy, in certain contexts, was also reconnaissance. "I'm sorry for that." "That's a private matter." "Of course." Marchetti opened his hands. "Of course it is." A pause. "I mention it only because a man's ability to think clearly is relevant to a conversation like this one. I'm not questioning your clarity. I'm noting that I've been in similar positions and I understand the distraction." Vincent looked at him. "My clarity is fine, Frank. Let's talk about the territorial arrangement." Marchetti smiled. It was a practiced smile, the smile of a man who had learned to deploy warmth the way other men deployed cold. "Let's." They talked for 2 hours. The negotiation was, on its surface, about port access and the division of certain transportation corridors that had become contested over the previous 18 months. Underneath that surface, it was about positioning, about which organization would hold the leverage position in a shifting regional landscape, about whose people controlled which choke points, about the long-term geometry of power between 2 entities that had managed a difficult coexistence for a decade. Vincent negotiated well. He knew he negotiated well because he was monitoring his own performance as he performed it, the way he always did, and what he observed was a man who was operating at perhaps 80% of his usual capacity and whose 80% was still sufficient for the room. He made 2 concessions he had planned to make and held 2 lines he had planned to hold. He identified the 2 moments when Marchetti was testing rather than negotiating and responded to the tests with the appropriate level of unresponsiveness. By the end of the second hour, they had a framework that both parties could present to their respective organizations as a reasonable resolution. They shook hands again at the door. "You'll be all right," Marchetti said, quietly, so that only Vincent could hear it. Not the diplomat speaking now, something more direct. "I know," Vincent said. He said it the way you said things you were not sure of to people you could not afford to be unsure in front of. In the car on the way back to New York, he called Tommy. "I need to know if Claire has a lawyer." "Working on it. Family law specifically. Find out if she's filed anything or is planning to file anything." He thought for a moment. "And don't let this look like opposition research. If she finds out I'm looking at her legal position, she'll feel threatened. I don't want her to feel threatened." A pause on the other end that Vincent recognized as Tommy. processing the instruction against his expectations of what instructions in this situation usually looked like. "Okay," Tommy said. "I mean it. This is information gathering. That's all." "Understood." Vincent ended the call and looked out the window at the New Jersey landscape flattening out toward the horizon. Gray sky, gray road, the particular stripped emptiness of late autumn before the first snow covered everything. He thought about Ethan asking his endless questions about volcanoes and tectonic plates and the insides of things. And he thought about what it would take to get back into a room with his son. And he thought about the 14-floor elevator ride he had taken 6 days ago and the voice he had heard through a frosted glass door, and how completely it had reorganized his understanding of the woman he had married. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something, a reflex, a 30-year habit of answering unknown numbers because in his world, unknown numbers were sometimes the most important ones, made him pick up. "Mr. DeLuca," a woman's voice. Controlled, precise, with the specific flatness of someone who had decided before dialing that they were not going to perform anything for this conversation. "My name is Diane Calloway." Vincent said nothing for 2 full seconds. "I know you've been looking," Diane said. "I know your people found the apartment. I know about the surveillance photographs." A brief pause. "I want you to understand something, and I want you to understand it clearly because I'm only going to say it once." "Go ahead." "Claire is not broken. She is not hiding. She is not waiting for you to find her so that she can have permission to come back." Diane's voice was steady in the way of a woman who had thought through every possible response Vincent might have and had prepared for all of them. She left because she chose to leave. She is building something real. And if you go to that apartment, if you show up there with your people and your money and your gravity, you will not get your family back. You will confirm every reason she had for leaving. Vincent listened. He did not interrupt. "Ethan asks about you," Diane said. The controlled voice fractured slightly on that sentence, then reassembled. "Every day? He asks his mother when he's going to see his dad. Claire tells him soon. She has been telling him soon for 10 days. A pause. "That word is running out." "What do you want from this call, Diane?" "I want you to think about what you actually want. Not what you can acquire. Not what you can recover. What you actually want. Because those are different things, and you have spent 30 years confusing them." She stopped. "Let that sit. Claire is not a thing that went missing. She is a person who made a decision. The question is whether you are capable of responding to a decision rather than a problem." Silence on both ends. "Is she safe?" Vincent asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. A pause. "Yes." "Ethan?" "He's fine. He made friends at school already. He gave a presentation about volcanoes on his second day, and apparently the class was riveted." Something moved through Vincent's chest. "Of course they were." Another pause, longer this time. The quality of the silence shifted slightly. "I'm not your enemy," Vincent said. "I know you're not my enemy," Diane said, "but you have been Claire's problem for a long time, and those are different categories." She let a beat pass. "Don't come to the apartment. Don't send anyone. Give her the space to decide what she wants to decide, and, if you're actually capable of it, give her a reason to decide differently than she has." The call ended. Vincent held the phone. Marcus drove north through the gray afternoon and said nothing. The confrontation with Arthur Malone happened 3 days later, and unlike the quiet, devastating conversation with Diane Calloway, it was loud in the particular way of 2 men who had worked alongside each other for years and had accumulated, without fully acknowledging it, a significant quantity of unsaid things that were now coming due. Arthur had run the legitimate front operations, the real estate holdings, the construction contracts, the hospitality portfolio, with competence and loyalty that Vincent had rewarded financially and trusted operationally. He was 51, with a careful manner and a sharp numerical mind, and he had never once in 6 years questioned Vincent's authority in a room. He questioned it now. He walked into the study without knocking, which had never happened before, and stood on the other side of the desk with a stack of folders under his arm and an expression that indicated he had made a decision about whether to have this conversation and had come down on the side of having it. "Sit down, Arthur." I'd rather stand. He dropped the folders on the desk. We have a problem. Vincent looked at the folders. He already knew, broadly, what they contained. Tell me. The Harmon Street development has hit a permitting wall because we missed 2 filing deadlines while you were unavailable. The hospitality group has a board meeting on Friday that requires your signature authority on 3 resolutions. And without those resolutions, 2 of the hotel management contracts lapse by default. Arthur's voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something sharp and pressurized. I've been managing this organization's legitimate face for 6 years by working inside a structure where your authority was present. You have been absent for 2 weeks. Not unavailable, absent. And the structure doesn't function without you at the top of it. Then I'll sign what needs to be signed. It's not just signatures, Vincent. Arthur took a step closer to the desk. It's the message. The people inside this organization, and the people outside it who work with this organization, have spent 2 weeks watching Vincent DeLuca disappear into a personal situation. That is not a message that lands quietly. That lands as vulnerability. And vulnerability in this world, I know what vulnerability in this world means, Arthur. Vincent's voice had dropped into the register that most people in his professional life understood as a warning. I built this world. Then act like it. The silence that followed was the specific kind that forms when a statement can't be taken back and both people in the room know it. Arthur didn't look away. To his credit, and Vincent would acknowledge the credit later when he had the distance for it, Arthur did not look away. You are telling me, Vincent said slowly, that I need to choose. I'm telling you that the organization is starting to feel your absence in ways that will become structural if they continue. I'm telling you that there are people, inside and outside, who are beginning to ask questions about stability. A pause. I'm not telling you to give up on your family. I'm telling you that you are the only person who can make both of those things work simultaneously, and right now you are not making either of them work. Vincent leaned back in his chair. Arthur was right. He understood that Arthur was right with the same clean analytical clarity with which he understood everything that was operationally true. And the fact that Arthur was right did not make the conversation easier. It made it considerably harder, because a wrong argument could be dismissed and a right argument had to be dealt with. Sit down, he said again. This time Arthur sat. I'm going to sign the resolutions. I'm going to deal with the permitting on Harmon Street. I'm going to be present. Vincent looked at him steadily. But I need you to hear me on something, and I need it to go no further than this room. Arthur waited. I'm going to dismantle parts of this organization. The air in the room changed. Not the legitimate operations, Vincent continued. Not the real estate, not the hospitality, not the financial holdings. Those stay and they grow. But the other parts, the parts that require the kind of infrastructure that makes a man unavailable to his son for months at a time, those parts are going to be handed off or shut down, and I am going to do it in a way that doesn't generate chaos. He watched Arthur's face process this, gradually, carefully, without creating a vacuum that invites problems. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. That's a significant change. Yes. The people who depend on those operations will be managed. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm restructuring. Vincent leaned forward. But I need to know if you're with me on this. Because I can do it without you, but it'll be slower and messier. Arthur looked at the folders on the desk, then at Vincent, then somewhere in the middle distance, as if he were doing a rapid and private calculation. I'm with you, he said. But I want it understood that my agreement here doesn't mean I think this is simple or that it won't generate friction. Nothing I've done in 30 years has been simple. Friction I can manage. Arthur nodded once and stood, recollecting his folders. He got as far as the door before he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, not turning around, Ethan asked me once what his father did for work. This was at your Christmas party 3 years ago. He was 3. He told me his dad helped people. A pause. I didn't correct him. He left. Vincent sat with that. Claire found the envelope on a Tuesday. It had been delivered to her office, not her apartment, addressed to Maya Perez Consulting, Suite 1407, with no return address. Her assistant, a 24-year-old named Priya, who was talented and perceptive and had been hired 2 months ago when the client volume finally justified it, placed it on Claire's desk with the rest of the morning correspondence. Claire almost didn't open it. She stood at her desk with her jacket still on and the envelope in her hand, and she knew, with the particular knowing that came from 9 years of existing inside Vincent DeLuca's world, that it had come from him, not a threat. Vincent did not send threats to people he loved, but something. She opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Not a surveillance photograph, not anything that had been taken without her knowledge. It was the beach house photograph, the one from the Outer Banks, from the 3rd year of their marriage, when Ethan had been too unsteady in the sand, and she had held his hands and felt for a series of minutes that she still returned to occasionally against her better judgment, completely and simply happy. On the back of the photograph, in Vincent's handwriting, not a note, not a paragraph, just 4 words that were the mirror image of the 4 words she had left him. I know, I'm sorry. Claire stood at her desk for a long time. Then she set the photograph face down on the stack of client files, picked up her phone, and dialed a number she had not dialed in 11 days. It rang twice. Claire. Vincent's voice. Low, careful, the voice of a man who was holding something very still. You sent the photograph, she said. Yes. You found my office. Yes. A silence that had a great deal of texture. Are you having me watched? She asked. Her voice was level. She had prepared herself to ask that question without the level breaking. I was, Vincent said. I stopped. A pause. I stopped because Diane Calloway told me what it would mean if I didn't, and she was right. Something moved through Claire at the mention of Diane, relief, and a complicated gratitude, and something else she didn't want to name in the middle of her office with Priya 20 feet away through a glass partition. What do you want, Vincent? To know that you're safe. Both of you. We're safe. Ethan? He's fine. He's happy at his school. He made a friend named Oscar who also likes volcanoes, which apparently is all the qualification required. A sound on the other end that might, in a different man, have been called a laugh. In Vincent, it was shorter than that, more involuntary, but it was real. Claire. He stopped. She could hear him choosing words, which was unusual. Vincent was not a man who struggled with words. He struggled with feeling and then translated the feeling into precise language, and the choosing was the struggling. I'm not calling to ask you to come back. I'm calling because I need you to know that I understand. Not as a strategy, not as a way of getting something. I understand what I did, what I've been doing. Another pause. And I'm trying to figure out if there's anything on the other side of that. Claire looked out her office window at the midtown skyline. Gray sky, the tops of buildings disappearing into low cloud. I don't know if there is, she said, and she said it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to say important things. I don't know if you're capable of being different. I don't know if I'm capable of trusting that you're capable of being different. Those are not small problems. I know. Don't send things to my office again. A pause. Okay, and don't watch me. Don't have people near us. If you want to earn anything back, it starts with giving me the actual space to decide what I want to decide. I understand. She hung up. She stood at the window for another minute. Then she went back to her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up the proposal she'd been drafting before the envelope arrived. She forced herself to focus on the numbers, on the risk framework, on the clean, logical architecture of financial analysis, where every element had a quantifiable relationship to every other element, and the outcome, while never perfectly predictable, was at least subject to rational pressure. It was the opposite of everything she felt. She worked for 3 hours without stopping, and when Priya knocked at 5:15 to say goodnight, Claire realized she had eaten nothing since morning and that the photograph was still on her desk, face down under the client files, and that at some point in the last 3 hours she had moved it from the bottom of the stack to the top. She didn't examine what that meant. She put on her jacket, picked up her bag, and went to collect her son. The call came at 11:17 that night, and it came from a number Vincent recognized as belonging to a man he had hoped, for various reasons, would not need to call him. Raymond Holt was 68 years old and occupied a position in the organizational landscape that had no formal title but functioned as something between an elder and an arbitrator. a man whose opinion carried weight across several families precisely because he had spent 40 years accumulating it without ever visibly seeking it. He called perhaps twice a year. When he called, it was never casual. "Raymond?" Vincent said. "Vincent," a voice like old wood. "I heard you've been distracted. I've been dealing with a family situation. I know what you've been dealing with." A pause. "I also know you had a productive conversation with Frank Marchetti last week, which tells me your judgment hasn't left you entirely." Another pause, longer. "What concerns me is what Arthur Malone has been hearing from you about restructuring." Vincent went still. "That was a private conversation. Arthur is a careful man. He didn't tell me the details. He told me enough to tell me he was concerned, and Arthur Malone concerned is worth paying attention to." Raymond's voice carried no accusation. It never did. It simply carried information and the implication that the information had weight. "I'm not calling to interfere in your operational decisions. I'm calling because there are people who watch what Vincent DeLuca does and draw conclusions. And some of those people are drawing conclusions right now that could create friction you don't need while you're managing a personal crisis." "What kind of conclusions?" "That you're soft. That the situation with your wife has cost you your edge. That there might be an opportunity in the instability." Raymond paused. "I don't believe those conclusions. I've known you for 18 years, but my believing them doesn't protect you from the people who do." Vincent sat in the dark of his study. The lamp was off. He hadn't turned it on when he sat down 2 hours ago, and had been sitting in the dark since. "Give me names," he said. "I'm not giving you names tonight. I'm giving you a warning, which is more valuable." Raymond's voice softened slightly. Not much, but the degree that was possible for a man like Raymond Holt. "Sort out your house, Vincent. Both of your houses. Because the window between a man who's dealing with something and a man who's lost his footing is shorter than people think." The call ended. Vincent set the phone on the desk. In the darkness of his study, surrounded by the architecture of an empire he had built and was now quietly beginning to dismantle, Vincent DeLuca understood for the first time with full clarity that he was not managing a personal crisis alongside his professional life. He was being forced, by the specific pressure of everything collapsing at once, to decide which one of those lives was actually his. And somewhere in a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, Claire Whitmore DeLuca lay awake in department store sheets with the photograph on the nightstand beside her. Face up now. She had turned it face up before she got into bed, a decision she did not interrogate. And she was not sleeping either, and the city hummed its indifferent hum outside the window. And neither of them knew that the next 72 hours were going to make every previous decision feel like preparation for the one decision neither of them could take back. The 72 hours Raymond Holt had implied began at 6:41 in the morning when Tommy Reardon walked into Vincent's kitchen without knocking and put a USB drive on the breakfast table without saying a word. Vincent was standing at the counter with a coffee he hadn't touched yet. He looked at the drive. He looked at Tommy's face, which had the particular closed quality of a man who has already processed something difficult and is now waiting for someone else to process it. "What is this?" "You need to watch it before I tell you what it is," Tommy said. "Because if I tell you first, you'll make a decision before you've seen everything, and you need to see everything." Vincent picked up the drive. "Where did it come from?" "Internal. One of our people flagged it 2 days ago. I've been verifying before bringing it to you because I needed to be certain." Tommy pulled out the chair across the breakfast table and sat down, which was the second time in 2 weeks that someone who preferred to stand had sat down in Vincent's kitchen. "I'm certain." Vincent took the drive to his study, plugged it into the laptop he kept on the side table, and watched for 11 minutes without moving. The footage was security camera material, the kind that came from a private system rather than a commercial building. High resolution, time-stamped, with a slightly elevated angle of a camera positioned to cover a room rather than a doorway. The room was a conference space Vincent recognized. It was the back room of a restaurant in Hoboken that his organization used for internal meetings when they needed a location that wasn't any of the standard venues. He had been in that room perhaps 30 times over the past decade. He had never had reason to question its security. On the screen, Arthur Malone sat across a table from a man named Dennis Farrow. Dennis Farrow was 44 years old and ran the transportation coordination arm of a competing organization out of Newark, not Marchetti's people, a different and smaller entity that had been operating in a contested corridor for 3 years. He and Vincent had never sat in the same room. There had never been a reason for them to, and there had certainly never been a reason for Dennis Farrow to be sitting in a room with Arthur Malone. The audio was partial, the camera had not been positioned for sound capture, but the body language was sufficient and 2 lip-readable exchanges were sufficient, and the handshake at the end of the footage, the specific kind of handshake that concluded an agreement rather than a greeting, was more than sufficient. Vincent closed the laptop. He sat without moving for a while. See it. Then he went back to the kitchen. Tommy was still there, both hands wrapped around a coffee he'd poured himself from the machine, waiting. "How long?" Vincent said. "The footage is from 6 weeks ago, but based on what I've been finding since the financial irregularities and the Harmon Street permitting, which I don't think were incompetence, I think this relationship has been developing for the better part of a year." "A year?" "Possibly longer." Vincent stood at the counter. He picked up his coffee, finally, and drank half of it without tasting it. "While I was dealing with Claire. The timing suggests he accelerated contact after the family situation began, but the groundwork was laid before that." Tommy's voice was careful in the way of a man delivering information he knows is going to generate a decision that he will then have to help execute. "He's been positioning Farrow's people to absorb the transportation corridor. If you restructure the way you told Arthur you were going to restructure, and Arthur manages the transition, Farrow ends up holding the corridor and Arthur ends up holding whatever Farrow agreed to give him," Vincent said. "Yes." Vincent set down the coffee cup. He thought about Arthur Malone sitting across from him 3 days ago, looking him in the eye, saying, "I'm with you." He thought about the 30 seconds of eye contact, the single nod, the practiced sincerity of a man who had spent 6 years learning the specific vocabulary of Vincent DeLuca's trust. He thought about the Christmas party 3 years ago, Arthur telling a 3-year-old Ethan that his father helped people and not correcting him. He thought about whether that last memory had been calculated too, whether Arthur had known, even then, that he was building a record of small loyalties he could draw on when the larger betrayal needed cover. "Where is he now?" Vincent said. "Office. He's at the Midtown office. He has a 9 o'clock. Call Sal. Tell him I need him at the Midtown office in 45 minutes. Vincent picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "Tell him to come alone." Tommy stood. "Vincent, how you handle this matters. If Farrow knows we know, I'm aware of the operational implications, Tommy. I know you are. I'm asking you to be measured." The word arrived with its history. Vincent looked at Tommy for a long moment. "Get me everything on Farrow's current positioning, where his people are, what the corridor situation looks like right now, what he stands to lose if this falls apart on his end." He buttoned his jacket. "And get me the Harmon Street files. All of them." Arthur was alone in the conference room when Vincent walked in. He had his files open on the table and a pen in his hand, and the expression of a man who had been told his boss was coming and had decided to present the image of uninterrupted work, which was itself a small miscalculation. Vincent had never once in his life arrived unannounced to find Arthur working. Arthur was a man who managed his energy carefully and never expended it on appearances. He looked up. His face did something very fast and very controlled, and if Vincent had not spent 30 years reading faces in rooms where faces were the only honest data available, he might have missed it. He did not miss it. "Morning," Arthur said. His voice was level. "I didn't know you were coming in." "Sit down, Arthur." "I am sitting." "Then stay sitting." Vincent walked to the far end of the conference table and pulled out the chair at the head. He sat down. Sal came in behind him and closed the door and stood against it without looking at Arthur, which was its own kind of language. Arthur's pen had stopped moving. "I'm going to ask you something," Vincent said, "and I'm going to ask it once, and I want you to think carefully before you answer, because the answer is going to determine a great deal about what happens next." He kept his voice quiet. The quieter Vincent's voice became in a room, the more the room contracted. "How long have you been talking to Dennis Farrow?" The pen left Arthur's hand. Not dramatically. It simply rolled out of his fingers and came to rest against his legal pad, and Arthur's right hand stayed where it was, fingers slightly open, as if he had forgotten to close them. 3 seconds passed. "I don't know what you—" "Arthur." Just the name, just the specific weight of it. Arthur closed his hand. He looked at the table. Then he looked up at Vincent, and what Vincent saw on his face was not the performance of innocence, but something more complicated. The expression of a man who has been running a calculation for a long time and has just reached the row where the numbers stop adding up. It started as a conversation, Arthur said. His voice had lost its management. It sounded smaller. Pharaoh approached me 14 months ago. I didn't take it seriously at first. I told him I wasn't interested. But you kept talking to him. He came back. He came back 3 times with a different... Arthur stopped. Started again. The restructuring, the changes you've been talking about. He said he knew they were coming. He said when you pulled back from the operational side, there was going to be a vacuum, and the vacuum was going to be filled by someone, and it might as well be organized. By someone who pays you, Vincent said. Arthur said nothing. You sat in my study, Vincent said. His voice had gone very flat. 3 days ago. You sat in my study, and I told you I was going to restructure. I told you I needed to know if you were with me, and you said yes. I meant, what did you mean, Arthur? The question landed in the room like something that couldn't be picked up. Arthur's jaw tightened. He looked at his hands. When he looked back up, something had shifted in his face. Not toward honesty exactly, but toward the particular exhausted honesty of a man who has recognized that the performance is finished. I meant that I didn't want you to know yet. I needed more time. More time for what? To decide. He said it quietly. To decide if I was actually doing this or if I was just... He stopped. I didn't give Pharaoh anything material. I didn't move any money. I didn't confirm any arrangements. You shook his hand on camera 6 weeks ago. The words fell between them like a wall coming down. Arthur went still in the way of a man who has just understood the precise dimensions of how thoroughly he has been seen. Vincent stood. He stood slowly, which was more frightening than fast would have been. You are going to write down everything, every conversation, every meeting, every number Pharaoh gave you, and every number you gave him. You are going to give that to Tommy by end of day. He straightened his jacket. And then you are going to disappear from this organization in a way that doesn't generate questions. I will tell people you resigned for health reasons. You will confirm that story if anyone asks. He moved toward the door. You will not contact Pharaoh. You will not contact anyone connected to him. You will go somewhere quiet, and you will stay there. Arthur was gripping the edge of the table. Vincent, this is the version where you go home. Vincent stopped at the door. He did not turn around. Don't make me construct another version. He walked out. In the hallway, Sal fell into step beside him without speaking. They reached the elevator. Vincent pressed the button. The elevator came. They rode down 12 floors in silence. In the lobby, Sal said, Pharaoh? Pharaoh, Vincent confirmed. How do you want to handle it? Carefully, and not today. The lobby doors opened onto the street. Cold air, the particular bite of November in New York, taxis and foot traffic, and the city going about itself with complete indifference to the fact that something had just broken inside a glass and steel tower that altered the geometry of the next several months. Today I need to think. He drove to Central Park, not with a destination. Marcus simply drove until Vincent said stop, which happened at the 72nd Street transverse. And then Vincent got out and walked while Marcus followed slowly in the Suburban along the Park Road at idle speed, which was a choreography they had managed before on the rare occasions when Vincent needed to move without arriving anywhere. The park was in late November stripped, trees bare, ground leaf covered and soft. The particular quiet of a public space in cold weather on a weekday morning when most people had somewhere to be. He walked with his hands in his jacket pockets and his breath visible in the air in front of him, and he thought. He thought about the architecture of betrayal. Not in the abstract. He had been betrayed before. Had managed it before, had handled situations more operationally complex than Arthur Malone and Dennis Pharaoh, but in the specific. Arthur had been with him 6 years. He had trusted Arthur with the legitimate face of the organization, which meant Arthur had access to the financial structures, the holding entity relationships, the permitting contacts, the hospitality management contracts. He had trusted him with the parts of the operation that were designed to be visible to the outside world, which meant Arthur had been, for 6 years, the window through which the outside world understood Vincent DeLuca's business legitimacy. And for at least 14 months, possibly longer, Arthur had been standing at that window with someone else standing behind him. The operational damage was manageable. Tommy was already on it. The Harmon Street situation could be reconstructed. The corridor arrangement with Pharaoh would collapse on its own now that Arthur was out of the picture. Pharaoh had no other point of entry, and without Arthur's inside positioning, whatever arrangement they'd been building had no foundation. That was the operational reality. It was manageable. What was not manageable? What Vincent walked through the stripped November park trying to find a frame for was the timing. 14 months ago, he had been whole. He had been running the organization at full capacity, present in the house in Greenwich, watching Ethan grow through his 5th year, having dinner with Claire on the evenings when he came home early enough, living inside the particular compound stability of a powerful man who had arranged his world to his specifications and believed, in the way of powerful men who have never been fundamentally interrupted, that the arrangement would continue. And in that wholeness, someone had decided he was vulnerable. Not because he was weak, because he was distracted. Because there was a domestic architecture that consumed a portion of his attention, a wife and a child who required some genuine fraction of the energy that had previously been entirely available to the organization. And someone had looked at that fraction and seen an angle. The thought arrived and sat in his chest like something cold. The betrayal had not happened because Vincent fell apart. The betrayal had been constructed during the months before he fell apart, as preparation for the moment when he would. Someone had planned for his loss of Claire before he had experienced it. He stopped walking. He stood on the path in the middle of Central Park with his breath in the cold air and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical in its impact, that the photograph from the Empire Crown rooftop had not been taken by an opportunistic waiter. It had been arranged. He pulled out his phone and called Tommy. "The waiter," he said, "the one from the rooftop. The one who took the photograph of me and Vanessa Sterling. Tell me what happened when you had him followed that night." A pause on the other end. "We lost him. He went out a service exit on the 58th floor. We didn't have anyone on the service corridor. Who employed him? What did the restaurant say when we ran his information? Fake employment documentation. He was on the books for 3 weeks before that night. The reference contact was a shell. Someone put him in that restaurant," Vincent said. "Someone with enough advance information to place a person 3 weeks out. Someone who knew I would be there with Vanessa Sterling on that specific night." He paused. "Who knew about that dinner?" Silence on the other end while Tommy ran through it. "Your assistant, Marcus. Sal knew you were going to the city, but not specifically where." A pause. "And Arthur. Arthur's office coordinates your scheduling on the legitimate side. The Empire Crown reservation would have gone through his assistant." The cold air moved through the park. "Arthur arranged the photograph," Vincent said. Not a question. Tommy's voice came back with a measured quietness that meant he was reaching the same conclusion in real time. "He needed you destabilized. He needed Claire gone, needed you off your footing, needed the restructuring conversation to happen. He engineered the sequence." Vincent stood very still. "The photograph didn't destroy my marriage," he said. And he said it with the specific stripped flatness of a man who has just had a story he was telling himself about his own failure corrected by something worse. "I destroyed my marriage." But Arthur lit the match. He stared at the bare trees. "Tommy, before you pull Arthur's documentation today, I need you to pull something else first." His voice had gone to the register that meant he had made a decision, and the decision was not reversible. "I need every communication between Arthur Malone and Vanessa Sterling." Another silence. Longer. "You think she was part of it?" Tommy said. "I think Vanessa Sterling appeared in my life at a specific moment and made herself very easy to spend an evening with. And I think Arthur Malone's fingerprints are on the waiter who photographed that evening, and I think I have been managed." He started walking again, back toward the 72nd Street entrance, toward Marcus and the Suburban, and the next several hours of unraveling something that had been built very carefully to unravel him first. Find out how far back the relationship between Arthur and Vanessa goes. Find out if she was paid, persuaded, or if this was her own initiative, and do it before end of day. But they said, "Understood." "And Tommy." He reached the park entrance. Marcus had the door open already, reading the approach correctly as he always did. "When you have it, all of it, I need you to get a message to Claire." A pause. "What kind of message?" Vincent got into the car. He sat for a moment with the door still open, the cold air coming in. "The truth," he said. "She deserves to know what actually happened that night." He pulled the door closed. "Even if it doesn't change anything, even if it's too late, she deserves the actual truth instead of the version she's been living inside." Marcus pulled into traffic. Vincent looked out the window at the city moving past, and he understood, with the complete and terrible clarity of a man who has just seen the full shape of something he has been standing too close to, that he had spent 11 days grieving a betrayal he had committed, when the actual betrayal had been committed against both of them. He and Claire had both been positioned. The difference was that Claire had responded by building something real, and Vincent had responded by losing his footing entirely, and Arthur Malone had watched both responses from close range and used them both as instruments. The car moved south through the city, and 3 blocks from the park, in a coffee shop on Columbus Avenue where she sometimes worked in the mornings before going to the office. Claire Whitmore DeLuca was sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and a coffee going cold beside it, and she was staring at her screen without reading it, and she was thinking about the photograph on her nightstand, and she had no way of knowing that the story she believed about how it came to exist was about to be taken apart entirely. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A message from a number she didn't recognize, which she would normally have ignored, but the first 4 words were visible in the preview, and those 4 words made her pick it up. "There's something you need." She opened the message. She read it, and her coffee went completely cold, while the world she had built her exit on shifted beneath her like ground that had never been as solid as it looked. And Claire Whitmore DeLuca sat in a Columbus Avenue coffee shop and felt the specific vertigo of a woman who has just discovered that the wound she has been healing from was not the wound she actually received. Claire read the message 3 times. The first time she read it for content. The second time she read it because she hadn't believed the content. The third time she read it slowly, word by word, the way you read something when you are trying to find the place where it stops being true and starts being something someone constructed to manipulate you, because that possibility had to be considered first, before any other response was permitted. She could not find that place. The message was from Tommy Reardon. His name was at the bottom, along with a phone number and a single line that said, "Call me if you need to verify any of this." The content was 8 paragraphs, precise and without editorializing, laying out what had been found in the previous 48 hours. Arthur Malone, Dennis Farrow. The fake employment documentation on the waiter. The Shell reference contact. The scheduling access. The 14-month construction of a situation designed to destabilize Vincent at the moment when destabilization would be most useful. Vanessa Sterling's name appeared in the 5th paragraph. The relationship between Vanessa and Arthur went back 22 months. They had met through a mutual contact in the hospitality sector. There were 17 documented communications between them in the 3 weeks before the Empire Crown dinner, including one, timestamped 2 days before the dinner, that contained the specific table reservation number and the phrase, "He won't notice until it's done." Claire set down her phone. She looked at her cold coffee. Outside the coffee shop window, Columbus Avenue moved through its ordinary Tuesday morning with complete indifference. Dog walkers, strollers, a delivery truck blocking the bike lane, 2 women in workout clothes waiting for the light. The world had not registered that anything had shifted. It never did. She picked up her phone and called Diane. Diane answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake and near her phone, which meant she had possibly already known this was coming. "Claire, did you know?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to be an answer before Diane said, "I didn't know the specifics. I knew something felt constructed about the photograph, the timing of it, the quality of it. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't have anything concrete and I didn't want to..." She stopped. "I didn't want to give you a reason to go back before you'd had the chance to find out if you wanted to go back." Claire absorbed that. It was a complex thing to absorb. Diane had withheld a suspicion in service of Claire's autonomy, which was both an act of care and an act that had cost Claire 3 weeks of believing a particular version of events. She couldn't decide how she felt about it and set it aside for later. "I need to think," Claire said. "I know. This doesn't fix anything." She said it firmly, to herself as much as to Diane. "Even if Vincent didn't make the choice I thought he made other choices, years of other choices. This doesn't erase those. I know that too. I just need to think." She ended the call. She sat with her cold coffee and her open laptop and the 8 paragraphs on her phone, and she thought about what it meant that the wound she had been healing from was not the wound she had actually received. She had left because of the photograph. She had built the exit strategy around the photograph as the final evidence of a pattern. The distance, the absences, the way Vincent had slowly stopped seeing her as a person with a separate interior life, and had started treating her as a component of his world, reliable and present, and requiring no particular attention because she had never yet failed to be there. The photograph had been the proof that he had taken that reliability and spent it on something else. But the photograph had been a weapon aimed at Vincent, and she had been standing directly behind him. That did not make this distance unreal. It did not manufacture the absences or the years of feeling like a satellite in Vincent's gravitational field, always orbiting, never approaching, kept at the exact distance he needed her at to function without requiring too much from him. Those things had happened. Those things were real, and they had weight, and they had accumulated over 9 years into the particular exhausted certainty that had made her pack a suitcase and wake Ethan and walk out into the night. But the photograph had been a lie, and she had made the most consequential decision of her marriage based on a lie. She closed her laptop. She stood up. She put on her coat and left the coffee shop and stood on Columbus Avenue in the November cold and did something she had not done in 3 weeks, which was allow herself to fully feel everything at once without managing it into something actionable. It was not comfortable. It was not supposed to be. She pulled out her phone and called a number she had been calling less often but had not deleted. It rang once. "Claire," Vincent's voice. Alert immediately, the particular alertness of a man who has been waiting for a call without admitting he was waiting. "I got Tommy's message," she said. A pause. "I know, I told him to send it. You could have called me yourself. I didn't want you to think I was using it as leverage. I wanted you to have it without me being attached to it." She stood on the sidewalk and watched the delivery truck finally move away from the bike lane. "It doesn't change everything," she said. "I know. But I need to see you." She said it before she had fully decided to say it, which was the truest version of how decisions like that actually happened. I need to see you, face to face. I need to have a conversation that isn't a phone call. The pause on his end had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Something unguarded. "When?" "Today. This afternoon." She thought for a moment. "Not the estate, somewhere neutral." "Wherever you want." "The park. The Bethesda fountain. 4 o'clock." She thought of something. "Come alone. No Marcus circling the block. No Sal at a distance. Alone." Another pause. "Okay." She hung up. She had 4 hours, and she used all of them working, because work was the only place where the variables responded to pressure in a predictable way. And she needed 4 hours of predictable before walking into the most unpredictable conversation of her adult life. She arrived at 3:58. Vincent was already there. He was standing at the edge of the Bethesda Fountain Plaza, hands in the pockets of a dark coat she hadn't seen before. No earpiece, no shadow, alone in the way she had asked. The fountain was off for the season, the plaza quieter than it would be in warmer months, a handful of other people moving through at the pace of people who had somewhere to be. He saw her the moment she came down the steps from the terrace, and he stayed where he was, which was the right thing to do. He let her close the distance, which told her something about how much he had been paying attention to the specific language of the past 3 weeks. She stopped 6 feet from him. They looked at each other. He looked worse than she had expected. Not broken. Vincent DeLuca was constitutionally incapable of looking broken, but worn in a way that was new, a wearing that had happened at a deeper layer than sleep deprivation or stress. His face had the quality of a landscape after prolonged weather. The structure was the same, the surface had changed. "You look tired," she said. "You look—" He stopped. Whatever he was going to say, he edited it. "You look like yourself." She understood what he meant. She had not looked like herself in a long time before she left. She had looked like the version of herself that existed inside his world, which was a version that was carefully maintained and correctly presented and genuinely hers in some ways, but not in the ways that mattered most. "I read everything Tommy sent," she said. "I read it 3 times. I know it doesn't—" "Let me finish." She said it without heat, just as a statement of what she needed. He closed his mouth. I know it doesn't undo the other things, the years of the other things. I'm not standing here because Arthur Malone engineered a photograph and that means our marriage was actually fine. She held his eyes. I'm standing here because I needed to look at you and say out loud that I know what actually happened that night, and I needed you to know that I know. Vincent nodded once. His jaw was tight. I should have told you myself. You didn't know yourself until 2 days ago. Before that. Before the photograph. I should have... He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. I've been thinking about the ways I let you disappear inside our life. Not the photograph, the years before it. The way I stopped. He looked away from her briefly, at the empty fountain basin, then back. The way I stopped asking what you wanted. The way I assumed that because you were there, you were all right. The way I made my work into the story of our family and made you into the person who organized around that story. The fountain plaza was quiet around them. Pigeons, leaf-scattered stone, the distant sound of the park in its November mode. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in years, Claire said. I know. And something crossed his face that she recognized as pain stripped of its management. Real pain, the ungoverned kind. I know it is. She took one step closer. Not toward reconciliation. She was not there yet, was not sure she would be. Was not going to make that decision standing at a November fountain 4 weeks after leaving, but toward him as a person, which was different. What are you going to do about Arthur? His face changed. The pain closed over and the other thing came back. The specific focused hardness of the man who had run an organization for 18 years. But it wasn't the same as it used to be. There was something underneath it now that hadn't been there before. Something that looked like it cost him to carry both things simultaneously. I'm handling it. That means something specific in your world. It means I'm handling it in a way that won't generate casualties. I'm not... He stopped. I'm not that anymore. I'm trying not to be that anymore. He looked at her directly. I told Arthur to document everything and disappear. The Pharaoh situation is being unwound. I'm restructuring in a way that doesn't leave vacuums. A pause. The violent parts of what I do, I'm getting out of them, gradually, carefully, but out. Claire studied him. She was good at studying people. She had built a career on the ability to assess risk through the variables of human behavior, and she applied it now without apology. Why? Because I have a son who thinks I help people, and I want to be the kind of man who deserves a son who thinks that. The words were simple. They were not dressed up. They landed simply, the way true things landed. She breathed out. The cold air took the breath and dissolved it. I'm not coming back to Greenwich. I'm not asking you to. I'm not coming back to the version of our life that existed there. Even if everything else changes, I'm not going back to being organized around you. I know. His voice was steady. I don't want that version either. It didn't work. It worked until it didn't. And what it produced when it stopped working was a woman who had to build a life in secret to have a life at all. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. I'm proud of what you built. I want you to know that. The firm, the clients, the analysis. I read the reports. You're extraordinary, Claire. You were always extraordinary. I just made it easier to not notice. She felt something move through her at that, not softening, exactly. More like a pressure releasing that had been present so long she had stopped registering it as pressure. Ethan asks about you every day, she said. I know. He needs to see you. I know that too. Vincent reached into his coat pocket and took out the gold wedding band. Her wedding band, the one she had left on the table in Greenwich, and held it in his palm without extending it toward her. Not offering, just showing her that he had it, that he had kept it, that it had been in his possession all this time. I'm not asking for anything today. I just wanted you to know I still have it. Claire looked at the ring in his palm. She looked at his face. She thought about the beach house photograph, the one he had sent her, the one that lived on her nightstand because she had made a decision at some point in the middle of the night that she didn't fully understand yet. I have to go get Ethan, she said. Okay. She turned to leave. Claire. She stopped, but didn't turn around. His voice behind her was quiet and without performance. I'm going to earn it back, or I'm going to accept that I can't. but I'm not going to stop trying to be worth it either way. She stood with that for a moment. Then she walked up the terrace steps without looking back, because she did not trust what her face would do if she looked back, and she was not ready to give him that information yet. She was halfway through the park when her phone rang. Not Tommy, not Diane. A number she recognized as belonging to the building where her office was located. The main security desk, a number she had programmed in when she first moved in because she was her father's daughter, and her father had taught her to know the number for the security desk in any building she spent time in. She answered. "This is Claire Whitmore, Ms. Whitmore." The guard's voice had a specific quality she recognized immediately. The controlled urgency of someone delivering bad news with professional restraint. "There's been an incident at Suite 1407. We need you to come to the building." Her stomach went tight. "What kind of incident?" "Your office was entered forcibly sometime in the last 2 hours. Your assistant called us. She came back from lunch and found the door." A pause. "The police are here. Your files. It looks like someone went through your files, ma'am, and your assistant found something on your desk that the officers would like you to identify." Claire stopped walking. The park moved around her, indifferent as always. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, and her voice was steady, but her hands were not, and she was already turning back toward the park entrance to flag a cab when she understood, with the cold analytical precision that had built her business and that she was deploying now against her own fear, that this was not a random break-in. Someone had gone through her files, her client files, her financial analysis, her investor documentation, her business correspondence, everything that constituted the operational intelligence of the company she had built in the margins of the life she had been trying to leave. Someone had sent a message, and the message was that the world she had built to stand on by herself was not as separate from Vincent's world as she had needed it to be. She called Vincent before she had consciously decided to. He picked up before the first ring finished. "Claire, my office was broken into." Her voice came out level because she forced it level. "Someone went through my files. My assistant found something on my desk that the police want me to identify." 2 seconds of silence, then, "Don't go in alone. I'll meet you there." "Vincent, this is Pharaoh." His voice had gone completely flat. The other version of him, the one that lived beneath the husband and the father, the one that had built and held an organization for 3 decades through exactly the kind of situations that were designed to destabilize. Arthur was supposed to be managed by end of day. Pharaoh found out we know. He's making a move. A pause, and in the pause she could hear him already in motion. "Don't go into that office until I get there. Wait in the lobby. Stay where the cameras are. I'm not going to—" "Claire." His voice cracked slightly on her name. Just slightly. Just enough. "Please." She stood on the park path. "Lobby," she said. "I'll wait in the lobby." She ended the call and started moving, and she was moving fast now, out of the park and onto Central Park West with her hand up for a cab, and she was thinking about Priya. 24-year-old Priya, who had been hired 2 months ago and came in early and stayed late and had no idea what world she had walked into. And she was thinking about her files and her clients and the 300% revenue growth that represented everything she had proven to herself she was capable of, and she was thinking about Dennis Farrow, who she had never met and who had never had a reason to know her name until Arthur Malone had handed it to him as an instrument. A cab stopped. She got in, gave the address. The cab moved south through the park traffic, and Claire sat in the back with her hands tight in her lap and thought about the specific irony of calling Vincent DeLuca the moment she needed protection, and whether that irony negated something important or whether it simply confirmed that some situations were too large for the life she had built so far to contain on its own. She did not have an answer. She had a lobby to get to and a husband she had just called and a 24-year-old assistant she needed to make sure was all right, and a company she had built from nothing that someone had just put their hands inside. The cab came out of the park at 72nd and turned east toward the Midtown Towers. And 3 blocks ahead, in a black Suburban running red lights with Marcus driving the way Marcus drove, when Vincent had told him why they were moving, Vincent DeLuca was thinking about Dennis Farrow, with a clarity that was absolute and a restraint that was costing him more than it ever had, because the restraint was not about tactics now. It was about the specific promise he had made to the woman who had just called him, standing in a park with his dead wedding ring in his palm, about the kind of man he was trying to become. The building came into view. Two police cruisers outside, a small cluster of people on the sidewalk, and standing just inside the lobby doors, visible through the glass, Claire, coat still on, bag on her shoulder, talking to a uniformed officer with the controlled composure of a woman who had learned over 9 years that composure in a crisis was not the absence of fear, but the decision to function anyway. Vincent got out of the Suburban before it fully stopped. He pushed through those lobby doors. Claire turned and saw him, and something in her face did the complicated thing that faces did when the person you had been trying to manage your feelings about walked toward you at the exact moment when you needed someone to walk toward you, and she did not look away. "My assistant is fine," she said immediately. "She was at lunch. She wasn't here when it happened." "Good." He scanned the lobby, the officer, the building security guard, the elevator bank. "What did they leave on your desk?" Claire reached into her bag and took out her phone, where she had a photograph the officer had let her take before anything was touched. She held it out to him. On the screen was a photograph of her desk. In the center, placed deliberately, was a single item, a photograph of Ethan. Not a photograph from her files or her desk. Those were already there. This was a different photograph. It had been taken from outside Ethan's school, from across the street, with a long lens. It was dated 2 days ago, time-stamped at 3:17 in the afternoon, which was the time school let out. Ethan was in the photograph. He was walking out of the school doors with his oversized backpack, looking up at something off camera with his mouth open in a question, exactly as he appeared in the surveillance photograph Vincent had turned face down on his desk 11 days ago because he could not look at it. "They know where Ethan goes to school," Claire said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. Vincent looked at the photograph on her phone screen for a long moment. He looked at his son's face. He looked at the timestamp. Then he put Claire's phone very carefully into her hand and turned to face the lobby, and the expression on his face was the one that 30 years in a particular world had built and maintained, and that had never, until this moment, been aimed at anything that also included the people he loved most. "I need to make a call," he said. "Vincent, I need to make one call and then I need to get Ethan." He turned back to her. His voice was completely controlled in the way of a man who is holding something enormous, very still. "Tell me which school, the exact address." And Claire Whitmore DeLuca, who had spent 3 weeks building a life that was entirely her own, who had left so that her son would never grow up believing that the world Vincent inhabited was the normal shape of the world, looked at her husband's face and gave him the address. Because Ethan was in that photograph. And some calculations, when the variable changed everything. Vincent made the call from the lobby. He walked 12 feet away from Claire, far enough for privacy but not far enough to lose sight of her, and he called Sal with the phone already at his ear before the distance was covered. "Pharaoh," he said. No preamble. He put eyes on Ethan's school. He left a photograph on Claire's desk, timestamped 2 days ago. He kept his voice low and absolutely level, which was the most dangerous version of his voice, and Sal had known that for 30 years. "I need to know where Pharaoh is right now. Physical location. I need it in 10 minutes. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "I'll call you back in 8. "And Sal." Vincent glanced back at Claire, who was still talking to the officer, her back straight, her face controlled. "Nobody moves on Pharaoh until I know where he is, and I've made a decision about how this ends. Nobody acts independently. Are we clear?" "Clear." He ended the call and went back to Claire. "I need to get Ethan," she said again. She had said it 4 times since showing him the photograph, and each time it came out with slightly less composure than the time before, which told him exactly what it told him. That everything else, the office, the files, the 3 weeks of separation, and the beach house photograph and the 6-paragraph message from Tommy, everything else was secondary to the fact that someone had stood outside her son's school with a long lens camera 2 days ago and had wanted her to know it. "Ethan is at school right now," Vincent said. "During school hours, in a building with staff and other children, he's the safest he can be." Pharaoh is making a statement, not a move. If he wanted to move on Ethan, he wouldn't have left a photograph. That's a distinction I'm not sure I can live with right now. "I know." He looked at her directly. "I have a car outside. We go get him together. We take him somewhere that isn't the apartment, and we deal with the rest of it from a position of knowing he's with us. Does that work?" Claire held his eyes for a long moment, Then she turned to the officer and said, "I need to leave. Someone will call you to schedule a statement." She didn't wait for the officer's response. She walked toward the lobby doors. Vincent followed. Awesome. Ethan was in the middle of a sentence about igneous rock formations when his teacher's classroom phone rang and he was told that both his parents were in the front office waiting to take him home early. He came through the office door with his backpack on and his coat half-buttoned the way he always had his coat half-buttoned because he considered full buttoning an unnecessary constraint. And he stopped in the doorway and looked at both of them standing 3 feet apart, and his face did something that neither Vincent nor Claire had an adequate defense against. He looked at his father for exactly 2 seconds. Then he crossed the room in the particular full commitment run of a 6-year-old who has decided that the distance between himself and the destination is an obstacle to be eliminated as fast as physically possible. And he hit Vincent at approximately hip height with enough force that Vincent took a step back, and Vincent's arms came down around him before any other response was possible. And Ethan said into his father's coat, muffled and completely certain, "I knew you'd come." Vincent closed his eyes. He held his son for a moment that had no useful duration. It was long enough, and it was not long enough, and those were the same thing simultaneously. He felt Ethan's spine under his hands, the small ridge of the backpack, the half-buttoned coat, the way Ethan had his father's shoulders even at 6 years old, already that structure, already carrying itself with that particular set. "Hey, buddy," Vincent said. His voice came out rougher than intended. He cleared his throat. Ethan pulled back and looked up at him with Claire's eyes. "Where were you?" The question had no accusation in it. It was a genuine inquiry in the register of a child who wants information because information is how the world becomes comprehensible. "I was working on something," Vincent said. "Something important." Ethan considered this. "Is it done?" "Almost." Ethan looked at his mother, then back at his father. He was 6 years old and not unobservant. "Are you coming with us?" "Yes," Vincent said. Ethan nodded with the specific satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed and who is ready to move on to the next question. "Can we get food? We never have lunch early." Claire made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "Yes," she said. "We can get food." They took Ethan to a diner on Amsterdam Avenue that Claire had been to twice since moving to the neighborhood, and that Ethan had been asking to try since he spotted it from the school bus. It had red vinyl booths and laminated menus, and a counter with rotating pie displays, and was exactly the kind of place that existed entirely outside the geography of Vincent DeLuca's professional world, which was precisely why it was the right place. Ethan ordered pancakes with a side of bacon and explained to the waitress unprompted the difference between shield volcanoes and stratovolcanoes, while she wrote down the order with the practiced patience of someone who had been taking diner orders for 20 years and had heard most things. Vincent ordered coffee. Claire ordered eggs she was not going to eat and coffee she was going to drink. The waitress left. Ethan arranged his silverware. "Dad," Ethan said. "Yeah, Oscar's mom says his dad works too much too." He said it with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to approach certain subjects obliquely. "But Oscar's dad comes to his soccer games." Vincent sat with that for a moment. "Does he?" "Yeah." Ethan lined up his fork and knife so they were precisely parallel. "I don't play soccer, but there's a science fair." "When's the science fair?" 3 weeks. Ethan looked up. "It's on a Saturday." "I'll be there," Vincent said. Ethan looked at him with the specific evaluating expression of a child who has learned, through the particular education of experience, that "I'll be there" was a category of statement that required more evidence than the statement itself provided before it could be fully accepted. He looked at his father for a long moment. Then he looked at his mother. Claire met her son's eyes and gave him the small nod that was their private signal for yes. This is true. You can trust it. She gave it without looking at Vincent, which meant she was making a decision about her son's ability to trust his father that was independent of her own, which was the most difficult kind of generosity she had demonstrated in the past 3 weeks, and possibly longer. Ethan returned to his silverware arrangement. "Okay," he said. "I'm doing volcanoes, obviously." "Damaging." Sal called at 2:17. Vincent excused himself from the booth and stood near the diner entrance with the cold coming under the door every time it opened, and he listened to Sal give him the address. a warehouse property in Greenpoint that Pharaoh used for transportation staging, where Pharaoh was confirmed present with 4 of his people. And he held the phone and thought about what he had told Arthur in the conference room. This is the version where you go home. He thought about what he told Claire in Central Park, the violent parts of what I do. I'm getting out of them. He thought about Ethan in the red vinyl booth explaining volcanoes. He thought about all of these things in approximately 12 seconds, and then he said, "Call Raymond Holt. Tell him I need him to make a call to Pharaoh's organization. Not a threat, an offer of arbitration. Tell Raymond I'm prepared to cede the full transportation corridor without negotiation. Pharaoh gets what he wanted without the cost of a war." Silence on Sal's end. "You're giving him the corridor. It's not worth what the alternative costs." Vincent watched a couple come through the diner door, unwinding scarves, laughing about something. "The corridor generates revenue. Revenue I can replace. Tell Raymond the only condition is that Pharaoh's people stay completely clear of my family. Claire, Ethan, the office, the apartment. Complete separation, permanent. If Raymond can get Pharaoh to agree to that condition, the corridor is his. And if Pharaoh doesn't agree, then we have a different conversation. But let's try this one first." He paused. "Raymond will get him to agree. Pharaoh's smart enough to take a clean win when it's offered." "This is a significant concession, Vincent. I know what it is, Sal." And then, because Sal had known him for 30 years and had earned the complete version, "I know exactly what it costs, and I've decided it's worth it. Make the call." He went back to the booth. Ethan was telling Claire about Oscar's theory that you could theoretically make a volcano using only kitchen materials, which Ethan considered scientifically imprecise but socially understandable. Claire was listening with her chin in her hand and the expression she wore when she was genuinely entertained but not performing it. Vincent slid back into the booth and picked up his coffee and watched his family for a moment before either of them looked up. He thought, "This is what I built an empire instead of." He thought, "This is what the empire was supposed to be for, and I forgot that entirely somewhere between the 1st year and the 9th. Ethan looked up. "Dad, do you know about baking soda volcanoes?" "I've heard of them." "They're not accurate." "No?" "No, real volcanoes involve tectonic pressure and magma chambers. Baking soda just makes foam." Ethan said this with the tone of someone delivering a verdict. "But they look cool." "I can respect that distinction," Vincent said. Ethan nodded. He appeared satisfied. He returned to his pancakes. Raymond Holt called back at 4:45. Vincent was in Marcus's Suburban, parked on Amsterdam Avenue while Claire took Ethan back to the apartment to start the beginning of the evening. The routine she had rebuilt in the 3 weeks since leaving, the specific reliable sequence of after-school snack and homework and dinner that she had constructed with deliberate care as the opposite of the unpredictable rhythms of their life in Greenwich. Vincent had walked them to the building door. He had hugged Ethan, who had gripped him around the neck with both arms, and then released him and gone inside with the decisive energy of a child whose afternoon had been resolved to his satisfaction. Claire had paused at the door. "The science fair," she said. 3 weeks. It's at 9 in the morning." "I know." She looked at him. "Don't make me explain to him why you're not there." "I'll be there." She held his eyes for another moment, then she went inside. He had been sitting in the Suburban since then, and when Raymond called, he picked up immediately. "It's done," Raymond said, without preamble, in the manner of a man who had been resolving situations like this for 40 years and had no need for dramatic framing. Pharaoh agreed. "He takes the corridor, clean and uncontested. His people stay entirely clear of your family, permanently. He understands the terms, and he understands what a violation of those terms would mean." A pause. "He also wants it understood that the photograph was a message, not a threat. He says he has no interest in the woman or the child." "He should have thought more carefully about the difference before he left the photograph," Vincent said. He acknowledged that. Raymond's tone carried the mild disapproval of an elder who had watched unnecessary escalations create unnecessary complications for decades. The corridor was always the objective. Arthur moved ahead of Pharaoh's timeline. The photograph was Pharaoh's way of accelerating a conclusion. "Arthur moved on his own timeline," Vincent said. "Pharaoh was a tool. Arthur was the architect." "Yes." A pause. "Arthur has left the city. He'll stay gone." something in Raymond's voice that might have been, in a different context, compassion. You built something worth protecting, Vincent. I'm glad you found a way to protect it without burning the rest down in the process. I had help understanding what was worth protecting. Raymond was quiet for a moment. How is the family situation? Unresolved, Vincent said, but in progress. Good. And then Raymond Holt, who was 68 years old and had navigated 4 decades of a world that generally destroyed the people inside it, said something that Vincent had not expected from him and would not forget. The work was never the point. We told ourselves it was, because the work was what we were good at, but it was never the point. He ended the call. Vincent sat in the car. The street outside was doing its late afternoon thing. School out, the sidewalk thicker with children, a woman pushing a stroller with coffee in the cup holder, a man walking a dog that had stopped to investigate something in the gutter with the intense focus of a creature for whom the immediate sensory world was everything. Ordinary life conducted without awareness of the machinery that operated in the spaces beneath it. He had been part of that machinery for 30 years. He thought about what it would mean to stop being part of it. Not the financial holdings, not the real estate, not the legitimate infrastructure that had been built alongside the rest. Those were things that employed people and generated value, and could continue without requiring anyone to be the thing Vincent had been. He meant the other parts, the parts that Raymond had implied, and that Ethan, at 6 years old, had accidentally described with perfect accuracy. My dad helps people. The parts that were the opposite of that. He had told Claire he was getting out of those parts. He had told Arthur. He had made the decision in pieces over the past 3 weeks and articulated it in the conversation with Raymond, and now, sitting in a parked car on Amsterdam Avenue, watching ordinary life proceed at its ordinary pace, he understood that the decision was no longer in progress. It was made. It had been made, probably, the moment he walked back into his house and found the wedding ring on the dining table. And everything since had been the working out of what that decision actually required. It required this: the corridor given to Pharaoh. Arthur, gone. The violent infrastructure, dismantled piece by piece with the same patience and methodology that had built it, handed off or shut down over the months ahead, leaving behind only the things that could withstand daylight. It required the science fair. 3 weeks, 9 in the morning. It required whatever came next with Claire, which was not reconciliation on a timeline, and not forgiveness on demand, and not the restoration of the Greenwich life, which had never been the right life anyway. It required the slower and more difficult thing, the proving, through the accumulation of ordinary moments, that a man who had spent 30 years building an empire could dismantle enough of it to become someone his son didn't have to find a careful way to describe. He called Tommy. Start pulling together the restructuring plan. I want it comprehensive. Every operational element that needs to be transferred or wound down. A timeline for each. The right people managing each transition. He watched a boy on a scooter navigate around the dog walker on the sidewalk with impressive technical skill. I want it done right. No chaos, no vacuum, no collateral damage. Clean. That's going to take months, Tommy said. I know. Start tonight. He ended the call. He sat for another few minutes. Then he got out of the car. He walked to the building door, and he pressed the buzzer for 4C, and he waited. Claire's voice came through the intercom after a moment, cautious and clear. Vincent, I know it's not a good time, he said. I know you need the evening with Ethan. I'm not asking to come up. He looked at the intercom panel, at the small metal grill through which her voice had come. I just wanted to tell you that it's handled. Pharaoh agreed to terms. His people are clear of you and Ethan, permanently. The situation is resolved. A pause. And Arthur, she said, gone. He won't be a problem. Another pause, longer. Through the building door he could faintly hear the sound of the lobby, the elevator, a distant television from somewhere upstairs, the particular ambient sound of a building full of people living their evenings. Thank you for telling me, Claire said. You deserve to know tonight. Silence on the intercom. Ethan wants to show you something, she said finally. Her voice had changed slightly. Not softer exactly, but with less architecture around it. He made a diagram of his science fair project. He's been working on it since we got home. A pause that he did not try to fill. You could come up for 20 minutes. See the diagram. You don't have to stay for dinner. Vincent stood on the sidewalk in the November evening. Okay, he said. Up. The diagram was extraordinary. It covered 3 pieces of paper taped together and included a cross-section of tectonic plates, a detailed magma chamber, annotations in Ethan's handwriting that mixed correctly spelled scientific terms with phonetic approximations of the ones he hadn't fully committed to memory yet, and a color-coded key that used 6 different markers. Ethan walked his father through it, standing on his toes to point at the top sections, narrating with the specific, concentrated intensity of someone presenting work they have invested in fully and want the audience to understand completely. Vincent asked questions. Real questions, not the performed questions of a distracted parent manufacturing engagement. He asked about the relationship between pressure and eruption timing. He asked why Ethan had chosen to include 2 different volcano types in the same diagram. He asked about the color coding system. Ethan answered everything with the authority of someone who has done the research. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway watching. She had a dish towel over her shoulder from making dinner and a coffee in her hand, and she was watching her husband and her son at the kitchen table with the particular quality of attention that she reserved for things she needed to see completely. Not to make a decision, but simply to know. To have the full image rather than the partial one. After 20 minutes, Ethan began to wind down in the way of a child whose energy had been fully deployed across a complex day and was now requesting a transition toward the quieter part of the evening. He rolled up the diagram carefully. He had developed opinions about the proper rolling technique and put it in the cardboard tube he'd been using for storage. "You have to actually look at it at the fair," he told Vincent, "not just nod. I'll look at every part of it and ask questions." Ethan tucked the tube under his arm. "Good ones. I'll prepare some in advance." Ethan appeared to consider whether this was an acceptable level of commitment. He decided it was. He said goodnight to his father with the same uncomplicated directness with which he did everything and went down the hall toward his room, already in conversation with Captain about the events of the day before he was fully out of sight. The apartment was quiet. Vincent stood from the kitchen table. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He looked at the kitchen, the department store dishes drying in the rack, the handprint painting on the refrigerator, the good simple order of a life being built with intention. "He's going to be all right," Vincent said, not as a question. "He's already all right," Claire said. "He's been all right, he's 6 and resilient, and he has a mother who shows up every day without exception." She paused. "He's been missing his father. That's the one thing I couldn't fix." Vincent nodded. He moved toward the door. "Vincent," he stopped. She had come out of the kitchen doorway and was standing in the middle of the living room with the dish towel still over her shoulder, the coffee still in her hand, looking at him with the direct and evaluating attention she had given him at the fountain, and that he understood now was not judgment, but genuine assessment. The same intelligence she applied to everything, turned on the most important question available. "I'm not ready to make a decision about us," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to make a decision tonight or next week or on any particular timeline because it feels like the appropriate amount of time has passed." She held his eyes. "But I'm willing to let you be present while I decide. Not in this apartment, not back in Greenwich, just present in the way you were tonight." Vincent stood with that. He understood what she was offering and what she was not offering, and he understood that the distinction was precise and deliberate and that collapsing it in any direction would be the wrong move. She was not offering forgiveness. She was not offering return. She was offering the space in which those things might, over time and through the specific currency of demonstrated change, become possible. "That's enough," he said, and he meant it without qualification. She nodded once. He put on his jacket. At the door he stopped one more time, and he took the wedding ring from his pocket and looked at it for a moment. The gold band that had spent 3 weeks in his jacket pocket, that he had turned over in his fingers in the dark of his study, that he had carried to Central Park and to a diner booth and to a lobby while police officers photographed a broken door. He set it on the small table beside the apartment door, the one with keys on it and a bowl for change and a small drawing Ethan had made of the 3 of them standing in front of what appeared to be an erupting volcano. He set it there. Not as a statement, not as a message. Just as a thing returned to the place it belonged, to wait for whatever came next. He left. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, Vincent DeLuca walked into the gymnasium of a public school on the Upper West Side carrying his son's favorite homemade lunch and nothing else. No Marcus outside. No Sal at a distance. No earpiece. No black Suburban at the curb. No perimeter of quiet men maintaining a radius. He was wearing a coat Claire had never seen before. Not the Italian wool, not the tailored black, but a plain dark jacket from a store on Broadway that he had bought the previous week because he had walked past it, and the jacket looked like something a person wore to a school event, and he had decided to be that person. The gymnasium smelled like floor wax and poster board. 23 children had arranged their projects on folding tables around the perimeter, and the noise was the specific happy chaos of children who have worked hard on something and have now been given an audience. Other parents were already moving through the displays with coffee cups and phones, the ambient pleasure of an ordinary Saturday morning organized around children's accomplishments. Ethan saw his father from across the room. He didn't run this time. He was presenting. He had a role, a project to stand beside, an audience to address. He tracked his father's approach with the dignity of a scientist receiving a distinguished visitor, and when Vincent reached the table, he extended his hand in a handshake, which he had apparently decided was the appropriate greeting for a formal occasion. Vincent shook his son's hand with full seriousness. "Tell me about the project," he said. Ethan told him about the project. He talked for 11 minutes without stopping, pointing to each section of the diagram with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the explanation and was now delivering it with genuine conviction. He explained the tectonic plates in the magma chamber. He explained the difference between shield and stratovolcanoes. He explained the color coding system and the pressure annotations and the small model he had built to demonstrate the eruption sequence, which did involve baking soda because there were certain practical constraints to working within the genre of the elementary school science fair, but which Ethan acknowledged with a scientist's equanimity. Vincent asked the questions he had prepared. Ethan answered everyone. Across the gymnasium, Claire stood near the entrance with a coffee from the shop on the corner, watching. She watched Vincent crouch down to Ethan's eye level to examine a detail in the diagram. She watched Ethan put his hand on his father's shoulder to direct his attention to a specific section. She watched Vincent's face as he listened. Genuinely listened, with the concentration of a man who had decided this was where his attention belonged and had given it completely. She watched, and she felt the specific and complicated thing that people felt when the version of someone they had needed to exist finally existed in front of them, and she understood that the feeling was not resolution but beginning, which was harder in some ways and more honest in all of them. She did not make a decision. She let herself feel it without making it into something actionable. After the science fair, the three of them walked out of the school into the November morning and turned toward the park because Ethan wanted to show his father the tree near the 81st Street entrance that he had been monitoring since October for evidence of seasonal change. They walked side by side, the three of them, Ethan slightly ahead, turning back periodically to continue his report on arboreal transformation. The city moved around them at its city pace, entirely unconcerned. Ethan ran ahead to the tree and began his assessment. Vincent and Claire walked side by side in the particular quiet of two people who have said the necessary things and are now inhabiting the space after them, which was not comfortable and was not uncomfortable but was real in the way that only things without performance in them were real. Vincent did not reach for her hand. He walked beside her. He was simply there, present in the plain sense of the word, not managing anything, not constructing anything, just walking through an ordinary Saturday morning in a city that did not know his name and did not care, beside the woman who had built a life from nothing while he was still trying to understand what he had lost. After a while, Claire shifted the coffee to her other hand. Her right hand was now at her side. She let it stay there for several steps. Then, without looking at him, without announcement, without making it into a moment that required anything from either of them beyond the simple fact of it, she reached out and took his hand. Not the beginning of the story they'd had before. The beginning of something else entirely. Ethan called out from the tree, "Dad, come look at this. The bark is doing something interesting." And Vincent DeLuca, who had built an empire and lost his footing and found it again on a longer road than any road he had ever traveled, let go of his wife's hand for the moment it took to go look at what his son had found, and then he came back to where she was standing, and he stood beside her in the thin winter sunlight filtering through bare branches, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, He was simply in the place he was in, without managing the perimeter, without monitoring the exits, without calculating what came next. His son was showing him something interesting about Bark. His wife was drinking her coffee and watching with the half-smile she wore when the world was briefly doing what she needed it to do. The city went about its indifferent and essential business all around them. It was enough. It was, in the end, the only thing that had ever been enough.